Just so everybody knows they're in the right room, just want to make sure this is Agile development with RJS for Ninja Rockstars. Just want to make sure, because for regular Rockstars, that's the other room. I'm intimidated going up against regular Rockstars. But no, this is, of course, Much Ado About CoffeeScript. My name's Matt Thompson. I work for Gowalla. And first question you might ask, why are we talking about CoffeeScript at a Ruby conference? The main answer is that Rails 3.1, that's the big news. Rails 3.1 is going to ship with that whenever it does. Right now it's at release candidate 5. Release candidate 1 came out in May. And the big news there, it has a lot of great features in it. Reversible migrations, prepared statements in active record, custom serializers, and a reported massive speed increase for anybody running Rails 1.9, Ruby 1.9. But the big news, the one that's causing the controversy, the one that's getting people riled up, is that by default, it's introducing an asset pipeline that has Sass and CoffeeScript, or SCSS, if you will. I'm just going to call it Sass. I like Sass better. They're both very similar in the respect that they are high-level languages that are less crappy versions than what they replace. And I won't say they're less crappy. They're actually excellent. I love Sass and I love CoffeeScript. Just to put this in perspective, here's what Sass gives you. This isn't a talk about Sass, but basic idea is you get things that you've always wanted in CSS. You have variables, you have some degree of programming constructs, some for loops, iterators, functions, stuff like that. It's an excellent language, and it's a better way to write CSS. It can be a full replacement for CSS. In the same way, CoffeeScript is a better way of writing JavaScript. It's everything that we would want JavaScript to be. It compiles down to JavaScript the same way that Sass compiles down to CSS, and it does everything but better. Again, so CoffeeScript, think of that as a better JavaScript. So these two things are very, very similar in that respect. Rails 3.1 is going to be shipping with this new asset pipeline. For this talk, we're going to be focusing on CoffeeScript. I think that's going to be the one that makes the greater impact, and going to talk about that impact. But first, we're just going to introduce CoffeeScript. So what we're going to cover, we're going to talk about installation, just a couple steps with that, how to integrate that with Rails, because that's usually how people want to use it. Any other framework, your Sinatras, et cetera, is just going to be pretty straightforward. Syntax, we're going to talk about the notable features there, what's changed, what's the difference, and there are major differences between JavaScript and CoffeeScript, and features, things that it's introducing to replace what are otherwise design patterns in JavaScript, things that you just have to hoop safety go through. So let's just start out. Installation, and you can follow along with me. Everybody has laptops out, so that's great. Installation, CoffeeScript. OK, first a little bit about that. CoffeeScript was created by Jeremy Ashkenaz, if I'm saying that right. The 0.10 release was Christmas Eve of 2009, and the 1.0 poetically was just a year later, Christmas Eve 2010. Currently it's at 1.12, which came out in the last month or two. Has a huge following at GitHub, several thousand followers, very active project, a lot of cool things coming out of it. People writing crazy experiments like different kinds of compilers, reverse compilers, that kind of thing. It's a really exciting project. But the one thing to remember above everything else is the central tenet of CoffeeScript, which is it's just JavaScript. That's the golden rule of CoffeeScript. While it's its own language, it's ultimately just a better way to write JavaScript. It compiles one way into JavaScript, and there's no runtime interpretation. At least there's some hacks that do it. But mainly the way you're going to use it is CoffeeScript compiles down to JavaScript, and that's what you're going to load in, in the web browser. This isn't a replacement in that sense. It's also just JavaScript in the way that the compiler, at least at some point, it's written in JavaScript itself. So CoffeeScript, it's JavaScript all the way down. So the main thing about CoffeeScript that you'll notice, that if there are two things. One, there's less syntactic cruft. You have to type a lot less to do the equivalent thing in JavaScript. The second one is that JavaScript design patterns are now features of CoffeeScript. Like I mentioned before, those hoops that you have to go through, the crazy hacks that you're writing in order to make things work the way you want, those are now first-class features in CoffeeScript. They've been designed into the language. All right, so installation. Back to that whole track. First thing you want to install is Node.js. Everybody loves Node.js. It's server-side JavaScript running on the V8 engine. It's really cool, but that's probably this is probably the easiest way to get CoffeeScript. I'll say that. First, you're going to install Node.js, and the best way to install Node.js, if you're on a Mac at least, Homebrew. You can also do that, sudo apt-get install. I'm sure Node, something like that for Linux. So yeah, Homebrew install Node. Should be running in a couple minutes. Well, with this network, who knows? But when you get home, it should be up in a couple minutes. Next step is to install npm. That is their the Node package manager. It's their gem, Ruby gems system. Just copy that curl line whenever you go to the web page, and paste that in your browser, and you'll have npm running again in a minute. Just this little thing. It's npm.js.org. Cool. And once you have npm running, or once you have that installed, just do an npm install -g CoffeeScript. The -g flag there is going to set it to a global binary, so you're going to run the coffee binary anywhere on your system. And if all succeeded, just write coffee into your terminal, and you should be presented with an interactive console, same way that you might get IRB if you typed in IRB. So here is, for anybody that's on TextMate, there is a TextMate bundle, also written by the author of CoffeeScript himself. So that's great if you're doing any editing. There's also a series of plugins for Vim and Emacs. So no matter what you're using, it's fully supported, and people have gone down that trail before. It's a nice language to write in already. Just an example. So here's the TextMate, or here's CoffeeScript in TextMate with the bundle. Nice syntax highlighting. If you do Command B, it compiles it into JavaScript, and if you do Command R, you can run and evaluate the output same way if you did Command R for like a Ruby file. There you go. That's what it would compile down to. All right. So integration with Rails, just something that people want to generally know how to do. First thing to do is to, in your gem file, add Rails 3.1 with the release candidate. In this case, you probably want to go RC5. Any one of those works. The thing to know about 3.1 is it changed a couple things up. That asset pipeline I was talking about lives in a subdirectory of assets. So you can put JavaScripts to be compiled and bundled together somehow. As you use the word bundle, that's confusing. But any CoffeeScript is going to go right there in app assets JavaScripts. And just put a .js.coffee at the end of it, and everything will be good to go. All right, syntax. So recall the golden rule of CoffeeScript, that it is just JavaScript all the way down. So we're going to take this to its logical extreme. We're going to do a transformation between JavaScript and CoffeeScript. So watch before your eyes as this ugly piece of code is refined into a beautiful, beautiful thing. The first step, of course, is to remove that syntactic cruft that we were talking about. Gone are the curly braces, the semicolons, and all that stuff. It wasn't necessary anyway. Second step, replacing function with the arrow. I don't know if we've settled on a name for that. Dash rocket, I think, was going around. That's kind of cool. Stabby blocks, I think, is another contender. Stabby blocks, I don't get it. But anyway, that's replacing the function keyword. So that's pretty much it. A lot nicer. Here's a more complex example that's actually taking advantage of one of the features of JavaScript being a prototypical language. We have this store object, and we're going to define an add function on its prototype. So that's how you do that. Not very clear. It's something that we have to grow to love as an idiom, rather than something that just makes sense out of the box. So the first step, of course, if we're converting this into CoffeeScript, take away all that excess syntax, and more semicolons and such. So yeah, that transition that was between this dot is now turning into the @ sign. That should be familiar to everybody. Anytime you see this dot, that can be that's alias to @ sign, or vice versa, whatever makes sense there. That store.prototype.add is going to become just add in the context of a class definition, which we'll talk about in a bit. But that's, instead of defining methods on a prototype, now you get this nice classical way of describing an object, which is kind of what we wanted in the whole time. All right, we still see that function keyword, and we know that has to go away. So we're going to convert that to a stabby block. But we're not done yet. There's actually something that we need to do there. Now that we have an argument in the function, we need to switch it around. So arguments for the function now go on the left side, then the arrow, dash rocket, and then there you go. There's your CoffeeScript. Quite a bit more concise, a lot more elegant. All right, to drive that point even further, just bullet points. Redundant punctuation, omitted, done. Function becomes dash rocket. This dot becomes @sign. Curly braces are now tab indented. So that's something that I didn't really call out while we were looking at that. But the way that we're able to deal with the not having those control structures is that we're using white space. Yes, this is kind of a Python kind of deal, but let's not think of it as like a Python thing. Let's think of it as something more loved, like Haml, like that, one of those kind of things. Let's just say it's a Haml feature. That's where they got it. Anyway, so on to features. And for features, let's say we're going to go down 10 of them. There were just 10. I didn't pick this as like a top 10 or anything. It's just a number. Who here has read JavaScript: The Good Parts, by the way? All right. Anybody that hasn't read it, do yourself a favor. It is an excellent, excellent read. It's what got me. I read it a couple of years ago. Before that, no difference between Java and JavaScript in my mind. I was that ignorant of the differences. It really is a beautiful language. Unfortunately, as you compare it to the complete reference, the good parts, it's a lot less. There are a lot of terrible parts of JavaScript, and that's good because CoffeeScript fixes them. And the first way that it does it is with this class pattern. All right, gone are the days of defining object prototypes or functions that construct instances of objects. That's just confusing. Instead, we're just going to say class, animal. And constructors, a lot like our initialize in Ruby, it's going to take in one argument in this case, and it's going to assign @name to name. There is even a shortcut to that. If you can say constructor @name, and that does already what it does. I don't know if you have to actually define the block further. So you can do constructors with just simple instance variable assignment in one line. Pretty neat. This is the output of JavaScript. This is this is what you'd have to keep in your mind as the canonical design pattern to get around. So I don't know. I choose this. That's Jesus. Yeah. So 2, no global variables. Lexical scoping is built into CoffeeScript. So if we go back a slide and we look at var animal, that is a very common mistake. That's something that you can write all the JavaScript you can get pretty far in JavaScript without realizing that var, what var does. That's a keyword that you need. Normally, every variable, if not defined by var or initialized with var, is going to have a global scope associated with it. That's awful. Anything that you have in CoffeeScript will automatically have the var assigned to it. If you want to connect two scripts together, if you want to bridge that namespace gap, if you want to have objects talk to each other in different contexts, the way that you would do that is to attach it to the window object. So that's how you get it across different scopes in a way to fix the whole global thing. All right, default arguments, something that we Rubyists have loved for a while. Just in your constructor, for instance, you could say name equals unknown, and now by default, if somebody just throws a constructor, initializes an object, new animal without any arguments, the name is now unknown. You don't have to define those things. Pretty neat. String interpolation, number 4. Again, something that we know and love, but we miss whenever we're in that JavaScript world, that cold, cold world, the browser. The pound and then curly braces inside of a string, that's now in CoffeeScript, so cool. Conditional suffixes, again, putting Rubyisms into CoffeeScript, and you can see why this is maybe part of a RubyConf, aside from the Rails stuff. Very similar, taking a lot of cues. So we have prices amount if the amount is greater than 0. So we're doing validation there with the conditional suffix. rather than having to do if amount, then tab in, anything like that. But on top of that, we also have operator aliases. And the operator aliases include things like is. So loves tacos is false unless near me. I don't know if that, it's too many negatives, but I guess that's a way of me saying I love tacos with keywords. Let's get to the next slide, please. OK, that's a matrix, I guess, kind of just throwing all that information. We have like is, isn't, not, and, or, true, yes, on, all sorts of things. That's, those are the new keywords, aliases that CoffeeScript has. 7. That's not right. Lexical scoping, what I really mean to say is that it's we have assignment using arrays. So let's say you can assign dollars and cents to the matching of like a regular expression for that. In that case, we have 2 match groups. We're going to match 1.20 in that case, so it'd be $1.20 that way, rather than actually having to keep a reference to the matches that happened in that regular expression and then assigning dollars to the 0th element and cents to the first, number 1. So that's have that. We've had that for a while. Their syntax just has the explicit square brackets around it. Number 8 is the existential operator. Question mark. Right. Existential operator is kind of like our or double pipe. And the way that you'd use that is to say, well, let's say dollars and cents is equal to that regular expression match, if that actually did match. If it didn't, we're just going to fall back on this. So it's like an or in that respect. It's an or equals.
If it only matches one of them?
If I believe that's the case. Yeah. I'm not sure if it just matches one, but that, in principle, I think it actually is both. So if that didn't go through, then default to 0, 0. Splats, variable length arguments. Again, we use that the asterisks in CoffeeScript. We're going to use this ellipses thing. So in this case, this is a really long example, but basically we're going to define a function, this award medals thing. So we have first, second, and third place, and then everybody else. If we have in a pie competition, and if we have our competitors, in this case, we say it's an array of all these nice people. If we award medals to the pie-eating competitors and apply the splat, the ellipses at the end, that's going to accord itself with the rest of the arguments. And in that case, Win, of course, gets the gold. Go Win. Silver to Steve. And Adam Keys, the bronze. Everybody else, good luck. Try again next year. So we have splats. Pretty nice. List comprehensions. Now, this is maybe the one feature that is not as Ruby-ish as the others. White space. Let's forget about that one. List comprehensions include is a different way of iterating through a loop. So we could say we eat food for food in toast, cheese, and wine. So that's different than using an enumerable method, the food.each, eat, etc. This is the alternative way that, again, you might see in Haml or more often in Python and other languages. So CoffeeScript includes that. That's a better way of iterating through a list, at least with respect to how JavaScript does it. It gets more complicated, too. You can attach conditionals. So this is actually kind of new. The languages that have comprehensions don't often have this either. You can eat food and food, but put a conditional that I only eat it when food is toast. And that actually extends to hashes as well. You could say, my favorites are the languages in that set of languages where we're keying language and awesomeness. And we're specifying the condition that awesomeness is greater than or equal to 7. So in that case, CoffeeScript makes it, Python, unfortunately, a little bit short. Objective-C, I'm a fan. Ruby, of course, and Potion. Those are my favorites. So we have list comprehensions. That's great. Those are the 10 major features of CoffeeScript. And that's covered kind of the basics of this stuff, what you'd maybe expect from a normal CoffeeScript talk in one of these conferences, the token CoffeeScript talk. There are resources available. Again, this stuff is really kind of what you would see on the normal CoffeeScript site, right? It's a great documentation there. You have a side-by-side comparison of CoffeeScript and its JavaScript comparisons. Again, this presentation obviously derived in a large part from this and reading through other things, working through the projects, but this is just fantastic documentation. Or if you're want to have the more long form of it with a test-driven development section, Jeffrey Grossenbach, the PEEP code is excellent. So just an glowing endorsement for that. Or if you don't want to shell out a couple bucks, again, the Rails cast on CoffeeScript, again, fantastic. Couldn't ask for anything more. 10-minute screencast. So that's basically like what a normal CoffeeScript at a Ruby conference talk would go, right? This is more to get you excited, to get you interested and motivated to check it out more. You know, so when you see it for the first time, you can say, with a knowing glance, you can start write code without fear. You know, this is the excite you part of the talk, and normally where you'd leave off at a meetup. But this is a Ruby conference, and I want to light a little fire, something like that. And I just want to say, this is a little language. This is something that has been advertised as something small. It started out as a toy, of course, as all great things do. It scratches an itch that is personal. It was just a little experiment in seeing how we could write a better version of JavaScript, which is not really that hard, but actually taking that to completion, you know, of course, is an exercise. So this guy, he read the Create Your Own Language ebook, and he after a little bit of development came up with CoffeeScript. And he's, again, very modest in his advertising. That's a little language. But I think it's a little bit more than that. Rails, including it in 3.1, is not a minor thing. Rails, of course, is the gorilla, the reason that a lot of people are using Ruby to begin with. So its impact can't be diminished, even though it seems like a token thing. This is important. So in order to kind of understand this in a historical context, just plant a seed in your minds to kind of show you like how JavaScript and Ruby have kind of co-evolved so far. Let's take a look at an abbreviated look of kind of Web 2.0 history. Okay, so the prehistoric days, Web 1.0 or 0 point something. 95, they were actually created in the same year, JavaScript and Ruby. They're born of the same vintage as Java as well, but that's often forgotten. So fast forward 2005, this is when Web 2.0 first really started. The main things, of course, that happen in that world is that Rails is created, it's released in its 1.0 or in its earlier versions, the alpha and beta versions. There's that screencast how to write a blog in a couple, 20 minutes, however many, and that takes the world by storm, kind of quietly. There's an undercurrent, and people are starting to get really excited about this Ruby thing. Meanwhile, JavaScript is now starting to pick up steam too. Ajax, it's a coin term by Jesse James Garrett, and becomes the perennial joke among people in the know as other people start to hire on this buzzword. I hate that buzzword. It was a buzzword that lasted, its reign lasted until recently with HTML5, which has replaced it as a perennial kind of nudge with the elbow. So that's what happened in 2005. That was the start of Web 2.0. You have sites like Dig and other things like that that have Ajax in them, and they're being powered by Ruby. That's great. It's exciting. People are getting a lot of money. A year later, where Ruby kind of diverges on this fact, or at least Rails, as a community, we kind of we're still rejecting JavaScript. RJS ships with 1.2, and it is just an affront to the language, in my opinion. It is a way, we're like, we want to do Ajax, but we want to do it right. And the right way in their minds was this RJS thing, which, the next slide has some RJS, and I'm kind of, I don't know. I don't want to get to that slide. I don't want to see it. jQuery 1.0 is released in 2006, around the same time, by John Russig, and it's interesting the timing of that. RJS before jQuery was kind of finished there. I'm not sure if the decision would have been different if the paths had been more aligned, but this is where kind of a line is drawn in the sand. And again, this is RJS for anybody that hasn't seen that, hasn't played around with it. It was interesting. It was trying to do JavaScript without, it was just Ajax without any of the JavaScript stuff. So kind of read the same way, but it wasn't, I could never figure it out myself. I don't know. 2007, again, parallel evolution of these two things. Ruby had a bunch of implementations going on. Like this is when you started to see the rise of them. These were serious contenders. The conversation was started. MRI, YARV, Rubinius, JRuby, all that kind of thing. At the same time, JavaScript is having a similar discussion. This is the era of competing JavaScript frameworks, where you have Prototype and jQuery, Dojo, MooTools, YUI. They're all gunning for primacy. They realize that this is the time to figure out the winner, and then from there on, that's web history. So it's interesting. I always like these parallels. 2008, nothing happens. Cartoon foxes on one, unicorns on the other. Nothing to say. 2009, Node.js makes its arrival. So we have this V8 thing that's gifted to us from the powers that be, and now we start running JavaScript on our machines. Crazy, unbelievable, not in the browser. Node.js takes advantage of that and quickly becomes a very hot topic, a way of doing invented web development, and it's starting to, it's still amazingly popular. Ruby 1.9 at the same time, 2009, is being released and evaluated, and it's a difference in the same way that JavaScript is now breaking out of the browser. Ruby is breaking out of being perceived as maybe slow. It's a reinvention of Ruby itself. It's a way of us maturing as a language as growing up. So again, parallels. And in 2010, CoffeeScript. That's when CoffeeScript came out, although towards the end of the year. This is very recent. I see this as the convergence of these two things. Now, what could that mean? So bear with me. There are going to be a lot of people that among us in this room that are going to write a lot more JavaScript indirectly through CoffeeScript. And perhaps because Rails is going to include CoffeeScript, there'll be a lot of JavaScript people that are now getting into Ruby in that way. It's becoming a gateway drug. Not drug, but like at least a bridge between these two, at sometimes disparate communities. People that think they don't have much in common at all, but when really they do. So in that fact, this is what my instruction to you. Like, it's keep calm and carry on, maybe. I guess, I don't know, these talks, if you're going to talk about politics, you're going to talk about philosophies of things, there's supposed to be something to take away from it, like some sort of an instructive voice, right? I'm supposed to tell you guys how to react to this. I'm giving you information, then I'm supposed to say, hey, you should do this. So maybe my instruction to you is keep calm and carry on. You guys, we're going to work in peace. We're going to have total harmony. This is going to be a new generation of us, polyglots, everyone. CoffeeScript is the way that we redefine ourselves together, these two lost brothers that are just coming together. Or maybe we should wake up and smell the coffee, because you know what? There is no reason now that anybody should write Ruby, because CoffeeScript plus Node.js means that you're able to write servers that, guess what? It's web scale, baby. Woo! You're gonna, it just makes more sense, right? And Rails 3.1, if that ever ships, right? It doesn't even matter anymore. CoffeeScript just game over, guys. Let's just pack it up. See you at Lone Star Coffee Conf next year. Woo! Texas Coffee, yeah, that. So let's just, everybody, just forget it. Freak out. Just go. It's like everybody just learn Python or something. I don't know. Like, what are we supposed to do? I don't know. There was a version of this talk where I was actually just going to start like inciting violence. I don't know, to be quite honest. But I'm not that type. Really, what I'd like to do is this. Let's get excited and make things. So, in all seriousness, seriously, I'm going to say serious again. Right? Serious. This is an important time for us. CoffeeScript is very cool, and in a way that's more significant than it's just being a better way to write JavaScript. It's these small changes in the context of the community that really makes the difference. It's what shapes the future of these two things. Who knows what'll win out? Who cares? Because you know what? Our jobs just got a lot easier, and it makes it a lot less of a pain in the butt to do what we want and do what we have to. And let's just embrace that. So I ask you guys take this opportunity, go home, learn CoffeeScript, try it out, make cool things, and tell everybody about that. Let's build these bridges. Let's do something great. What do you say? Thanks. So that was a short one. Q&A, I guess, for the next 10 or so minutes? Yeah, sure.
What do you think it is about CoffeeScript that makes it potentially not end up the way RJS did? That in 2 years we'll be talking about how crappy it was.
Exactly. Well, the reason for that is that the person who the creator of I'm terrible with names. Sorry. In creating CoffeeScript, he created it out of a vision of it was out of appreciation and not spite of JavaScript. It was also an appreciation of everything else they saw. You see a lot of these influences all together. I think the reason why it went out rather than like RJS was kind of doomed to failure is because it's constrained to actually still generate JavaScript, and it does so in the idiomatic way. And second, it's it's still prototypical, right? It's still, what you're generating is still a prototypical language. You still have the same functions, except now we're wrapping around a nice convenience to bridge that gap between classical and prototypical. So hopefully that'll work. I think that's what's happening so far. Sure?
Just two questions, kind of. Do you think the CoffeeScript makes it easier to write APIs or libraries? Are there any good CoffeeScript libraries available with API and docs in CoffeeScript?
That's a very good question. So that's actually the main reason.
Repeat the question.
Oh, sorry. So the question is, are there any libraries written in CoffeeScript right now? And if so, like, are there any good examples of them using documentation? That's the kind of the gist. So yeah, that's actually a really good point. So the main reason why you might not want to use CoffeeScript right now, and this would be better to a JavaScript audience, the reason you wouldn't want to is because it's still new. Like if you're writing a jQuery plugin and you want to make sure that you get community support, you want people to contribute to it. Like people know JavaScript, so that's really the vestige that's keeping it back. So there are a lot of projects now that are being run in CoffeeScript. The first one that comes to mind is PAL. If you look at that, I believe the documentation should be okay with that. I'd hope, at least.
The second part was kind of, does it make it easier to write prototypes?
Oh, does it make it easier to write?
I mean, you showed us some. Does it allow, I guess, making better APIs?
Making better APIs, so like easier ways to use things. It's a lot clearer, I think. So the thing about good APIs is that it's very clear what the intention of the author is, how they want you to use it. And there's almost no question in my mind that one way is a more legible, clear way of expressing your thoughts, because you have to jump through less hoops. So I hope so, at least. Sure.
This is more of a what's your opinion question.
Okay, well,
but so it seemed like a few years ago, like the Mozilla Foundation was pushing pretty hard to try and update JavaScript itself, and now you see CoffeeScript, which I've used some and I really like it so far, and I've seen a lot of people talking about ClojureScript. But so it seems like now instead of actually trying to fix JavaScript, people are just making languages that compile down to JavaScript.
Right.
Do you think there's any chance that we'll actually see this affecting JavaScript implementations in browsers and getting the actual language fixed up, or do you think these will just kind of hang around as band-aid fixes for?
So I can do better than an opinion question. So the question is, we're trying to reinvent, obviously CoffeeScript reinventing JavaScript. Are we going to see any pushback? Are we going to see any improvement to JavaScript rather than fork it and screw whatever happened before? The answer, not an opinion at all, the factual answer is yes. In fact, like we have the people that are actively maintaining JavaScript itself is supposed to be specifying the 1.6 ECMAScript standard. Douglas Crockford, who wrote the good JavaScript, the good parts, maybe the godfather of the JavaScript scene, has openly embraced CoffeeScript. He's like, this is great. Of course I love this. So it's being met with a warm reception. We're going to see more of these kind of features bubble up into JavaScript, and in the meantime, you can still write CoffeeScript. So eventually, things are just getting better and better.
So my opinion has always been that like CoffeeScript's great for the server side, but when it compiles down to JavaScript, it's very verbose. So I mean, you're going to be sending a lot of extra code down the pipe to your clients, and I mean, it may make it a little easier to maintain, but to me, like, I mean, I've seen like it expand into like stuff I never thought it would.
Right.
Like 4 times more code than within the actual file.
And there is the fear of that, right? So I mean, if you're creating something that writes more code, like obviously those things can grow in size. However, in practice, and I feel like I can only attest to my experience and what I've heard from others, is that in general the JavaScript that CoffeeScript generates above a certain level, like obviously for one-line things, CoffeeScript's going to be bigger, but at a certain point, and on the level of things you might want to design for your website, your application, what it compiles is actually more efficient and smaller than the JavaScript that you'd probably need to write in order to make sense. It requires less infrastructure, I guess, because it's not human readable at that point. And besides, you minify that anyway, right?
Yeah, and also what's your opinion? I saw something like the other day, they have a CoffeeScript with a Google Closure compiler.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to play around with that very much, but it's exciting to know that no matter what happens, like CoffeeScript as a language is going to, maybe evolve a little bit, but the things that it generates from that spec will continue to improve, and that's my hope.
What's been your experience trying to debug CoffeeScript?
That's a common a really good question. That's the first concern I had. Is that okay? So the question is, whenever you're writing CoffeeScript, there's wonder of like, how do you debug that? Because what you're debugging is actually the outputted JavaScript. It's the same as Sass, right? So you have CSS, and you don't know how that CSS was generated from the Sass sometimes. You want to track down that line number. In my experience, it's pretty one-to-one. Like, you can line those things up, and the bodies of functions aren't getting obfuscated somewhere, and they're not appearing in places you wouldn't expect. If you just expand it, it's usually in a pretty linear way. It fans out, and you can see it that way. I don't know. It just depends. It's a function of how well you know JavaScript. Like it's not too bad, I guess. It's not a very satisfying answer, but yeah.
It seems like the only reason you would need to learn CoffeeScript is if you were writing it. For me, I'm mainly going to be reading it since I'm a tester. And so in thinking about that, there's no like way to get from JavaScript to CoffeeScript, right? It's only one way, right?
It used to be one way. I mean, so, OK, it's technically one way, but some people, like, just given a couple months after CoffeeScript really took off, people have written back compilers that are terrifying at the thought. You think that that's supposed to be a non-reversible function. But I don't know. It's supposed to be one way. It seems like we'll never get full one-to-one. But sorry, what?
So maybe another way to ask the question: if you were wanted to learn JavaScript and CoffeeScript, it seems like you'd have to start with JavaScript first.
Right. Yeah. This isn't a replacement. Sorry. Yeah. So the question, like, if you're trying to learn JavaScript, CoffeeScript isn't going to teach you JavaScript in the same way that just learning pure JavaScript would. I would recommend reading JavaScript, the good parts, and then you can kind of see, oh, this is why it's doing that. This class pattern that they're describing, it's right out of Crockford's book as the way that you're supposed to do object-oriented kind of programming. So, yeah, you gotta learn both, kind of, at least for now.
So what about like mingling with other third-party JavaScript libraries?
So, for instance, we had that example that we were writing jQuery in CoffeeScript. That's just the same. It's going to compile down in a way that works and doesn't conflict with anything else. You can write Node in it. You can interface with Node libraries. It's all JavaScript, so you can interlace the two, no problem. Everything just compiles all right. Yeah.
And what about any glaring holes in the implementation?
Glaring holes in the implementation?
Things that it hadn't covered yet that
I haven't really run into any glaring holes as far as implementation. Again, like, the big problem that it needs to solve is how to make it more manageable to figure out how things were generated. So for debugging purposes, for instance. But in general, it's been just solid, and unfortunately, I don't know enough to know what the next problems are. I'm just in this, shiny up spirit, high kind of period of education. But yeah. All right. Any other questions? All right. Thank you guys so much. Appreciate it.